She went to collect her wages and 3 days later they found her with her throat cut. No one in the small town of St. Elmo could say exactly when fear began to settle in, but everyone remembered when it became impossible to ignore. Her name was Zora Burns, and until that October, she had been just another young woman trying to survive in a world that did not offer her many choices. She was quiet, hard-working, and known to keep to herself, but there were whispers that followed her long before her death ever did. Whispers about where she worked. Whispers about who she had been seen with. And whispers about something she was hiding. Zora had left her father's home weeks earlier, determined to collect the wages she believed she was owed. It should have been a simple journey, one that many in town had made before without consequence. But nothing about what followed would ever be simple again. When she arrived in Lincoln, she did not return. At first, no one panicked. A delay could be explained. A missed carriage could be forgiven. But by the second day, concern turned into unease, and by the third, it became something much darker. Search parties were formed, men moving through roads and fields with growing urgency. And then, just outside town, along a quiet and isolated path, someone found her. The discovery was not just tragic. It was brutal. Zora's body showed clear signs of struggle, her arms marked with bruises that told a story she could no longer speak. Her head bore deep wounds, violent enough to silence any doubt that this had been anything but intentional. And then there was her throat. Cut in a way that suggested finality. A deliberate act to ensure she would never identify whoever had done this. But the most shocking detail had not yet reached the public. Because when the doctor examined her body, another truth emerged. Zora Burns was pregnant. The news spread faster than the details of her death ever could. It changed everything. This was no longer just a murder. It was a scandal. And in a town where reputation mattered as much as truth, people began connecting pieces that may or may not have belonged together. The first suspicion fell on the man she was meant to marry. Thomas Jukes. He was the obvious choice, the closest one to her, the one who would be expected to know her secrets. But his alibi held firm. He had been seen, accounted for, and cleared in a way that left no room for doubt. So attention shifted. Slowly at first. Then all at once. To a man whose name carried weight in Lincoln. Orin Carpenter. He was older, respected, and known for his success. A carpenter and grain merchant who had built not just a business, but a reputation that few questioned. Zora had worked in his home as a domestic servant. That alone might have meant nothing. But people began to remember things they had once ignored. Sightings. Conversations. Moments that seemed harmless before now felt different under the shadow of her death. Some claimed they had seen them together even after her employment had ended. Others spoke of a closeness that went beyond what was appropriate. And then came the story that refused to stay buried. A trip to Peoria. A hotel register. And a name that did not belong. It was said that Carpenter had signed Zora in as his daughter. No one could prove exactly what happened during that trip, but the implication was enough to ignite suspicion. Then there were the letters. Private messages exchanged between them. Some containing money. Some containing words no one else had read. They were spoken of in hushed tones, as if even mentioning them made the situation more dangerous. But perhaps the most damaging testimony came from a woman who claimed Zora had confided in her. That she had named the father of her unborn child. And that name was Orin Carpenter. By then, the town had already begun to turn. Not officially. Not in court. But in the quiet judgments made behind closed doors. People started to believe they knew what had happened. A secret relationship. A pregnancy that could not be explained. And a man who had too much to lose. When authorities searched Carpenter's belongings, they found things that only deepened the suspicion. Hairpins that resembled Zora's. Stains that some believed could be blood. But belief was not proof. And in a time before science could confirm what people feared, everything remained just out of reach. Still, it was enough. Enough for an arrest. Enough to bring him before a coroner's inquest. Enough to make the entire town watch closely as the pieces were laid out, one by one. Yet even then, certainty refused to come. The evidence circled around him but never landed with enough force to hold. Witnesses spoke, but their words could be questioned. Stories were told, but none could be proven beyond doubt. And in that space between suspicion and truth, something dangerous began to grow. Because the more people believed he was guilty, the more unbearable it became to imagine he might walk free. And yet, that possibility remained. Hanging over the case. Waiting. Unanswered. The inquest ended without a clear answer, and that silence only made things worse. People left the room with more questions than they had entered with, and the name on everyone's lips was the same. Orin Carpenter. He was charged, released on bail, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the system might fail before it even began. But pressure from the public refused to fade. It grew louder. Angrier. Demanding something more than uncertainty. By January of 1884, a grand jury stepped in and made a decision that changed everything. Carpenter was indicted for murder. This time, there would be no easy exit. Bail was denied, and the case moved forward with a weight that could no longer be ignored. The town divided itself quietly. There were those who believed the truth was already obvious, that the evidence, though incomplete, pointed clearly in one direction. And there were those who clung to the idea that suspicion was not the same as guilt. That a man could not be condemned simply because the story felt convincing. When the trial began in March, it did not take long for it to outgrow its setting. So many people wanted to witness it that the venue had to be changed. Petersburg became the stage for a case that had already captured the attention of thousands. Inside the courtroom, every detail was examined. Every word carried weight. The prosecution built its argument carefully, threading together the relationship between Zora and Carpenter like a pattern they hoped the jury could not ignore. They spoke of opportunity. Of secrecy. Of a pregnancy that demanded explanation. They painted a picture of a man cornered by consequences, someone who saw only one way out. But the defense approached the same story differently. They did not try to rewrite it. They simply broke it apart. They questioned the witnesses, one by one, exposing inconsistencies, challenging memories, and reminding the court that belief was not evidence. They pointed out what was missing. No direct proof. No confirmed blood. No letters presented for the jury to see. Only claims. Only suggestions. Only a story that felt true without ever being proven. Carpenter himself remained silent. He did not take the stand. He did not offer the explanation many expected. And that silence became its own kind of argument. Some saw it as guilt. Others saw it as strategy. But either way, it left a space that no one could fill. As the days passed, tension inside the courtroom grew heavier. Outside, it was even worse. Crowds gathered, voices rising in frustration, convinced that justice was slipping through their fingers. By the time the case reached the jury, the outcome felt impossible to predict. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too many doubts lingered. And in the end, those doubts mattered more than anything else. On March 21, 1884, the verdict was delivered. Not guilty. The words landed with a force that no one could ignore. For some, it was relief. For others, it was disbelief. But for many, it felt like something had gone terribly wrong. The man they believed responsible was now free. And there was nothing they could do about it. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Carpenter could no longer walk through town without feeling the weight of suspicion pressing against him. Threats followed. Whispers turned into open hostility. It became clear that while the court had spoken, the people had not accepted its decision. Among those who refused to let it go was Zora's father. William Burns had already lost more than anyone could measure. Now, he was left with a verdict that offered no closure. No justice. Only a name he believed should have been held accountable. Months passed, but his anger did not fade. It sharpened. Focused. Until one day, it turned into action. In December of that same year, William Burns confronted Carpenter and fired a shot. It missed. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, but its meaning was clear. This was not over. Not for him. Not for anyone who believed the truth had been buried alongside Zora. Carpenter understood what that meant. Staying in Illinois was no longer an option. The place that had once respected him had become a place that rejected him. So he left. Quietly. Without ceremony. He moved to the Dakota Territory, putting distance between himself and the accusations that refused to disappear. And just like that, the case lost its center. There was no longer a man to watch. No trial to follow. No new evidence to examine. Only a memory. A story that people told and retold, each version shaped by belief rather than proof. Officially, the case remained unsolved. No one else was charged. No new suspect emerged. Zora Burns became another name in a growing list of questions that history could not answer. But the story refused to disappear. Because it was never just about what happened on that road outside Lincoln. It was about everything that came before it. The secrets. The silence. The moments that seemed insignificant until they were not. And the uncomfortable possibility that the truth had been visible all along, just never strong enough to hold in court. Even years later, people still argued about it. Some insisted that justice had failed. Others maintained that the system had worked exactly as it should. That without proof, there could be no conviction. But beneath those arguments was something deeper. A feeling that lingered long after the trial had ended. Because the most unsettling part of the story was not the violence. It was the uncertainty. The idea that someone could come so close to being held accountable and still walk away. That a life could end so brutally, and yet the answer could remain just out of reach. And maybe that is why the case of Zora Burns has never truly faded. Because it leaves behind a question that no verdict could resolve. Not who was accused. Not who was suspected. But who, if anyone, really got away with it. If you made it this far, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the jury made the right decision, or do you think something was missed? And if you want more stories like this, where the truth is never as clear as it seems, consider subscribing. Because sometimes, the most haunting cases are the ones that never find an ending. And this was one of them.